It's so good to see all of you here this morning. We're so excited that you can be with us in our Bible study today. I hope that your week has been very good. It's been some pretty nice weather for us. We're glad to be cooling off a little bit. But I hope that this continuing week continues to go well for you. I want to start with some quick questions before we begin. If you were to describe the book of James, what would you say this book is about?
Faith and works.
Okay, yeah. Faith and works. All right. How did James identify himself in the book? He said, "Hey, I'm Pastor James." All right, yeah, he said, "I'm a bondservant of God." I think the King James says in the very beginning, verse 1, James, a servant of God. You know, we should all identify ourselves in that very same way. All right, one more. What is the key verse for this book? Say what? Chapter 1, verse 12. That is a really good one. Yeah, we'll talk about that one today. That continues sort of a theme there, but that's not the exact one. James 1:22, that is it. Be ye doers of the word, not hearers only, deceiving your own selves. That's a very, all right, so what I would do if it were my Bible, I would sort of write that right where it says the Epistle of James. I would either circle that verse or write James 1:22 for the key. But yes, there are a lot of good key verses. James 1:12 is one of them. Okay, so there are probably 8 or 9 that are really stand out. But I believe James 1:22 is certainly the theme. Okay. Yeah, James 1:22. James 1:22. Yep. Yes, sir. All right, so here's our outline of the book. Okay, each chapter is going to go with each point. And chapter 1, of course, talks about the religion. Now, chapter 1 is tough because he's writing to a people who have been scattered throughout all different regions in Asia Minor. And he said, look, don't forget about your religion. You know, just because you've been persecuted doesn't mean that you can turn your back on the Lord and say, all right, well, I'm through. I'm not doing this anymore. So he said, look, we can make it through this. It's going to be tough, but he says we're going to make it through. Now, let me share with you a story here as we begin. See if I can catch up to where I was before. All right. Let's see. Here it is. There's a Scottish man and a Japanese man standing together, and both of them are products of a world war. The Japanese had the Scottish as slaves, and they used them to build a railroad. This Scottish man was a slave in Japan, or to Japan. This here is one of the officers that would beat and abuse people who worked on that railroad. Now, there's a story that I found. You can look this up online, and I got 3 slides here I want to share with you about this story, okay? And then I'm going to make my point and move on. Ernest Gordon was a Scottish prisoner of war in World War II. He wrote Miracle on the River of Kwai. That is a book. To tell the story of his experiences at the hands of the Japanese as he and his fellow soldiers were forced to work on a Burma-Siam railway. There were 393 fatalities for each mile of track that was laid, as prisoners labored under inhumane conditions, oppressive heat, tropical diseases, so on and so forth. Many succumbed to the brutal environment, and others suspected of lagging were bayoneted. What does that mean? You ever seen those guns with a knife on the end? SKS? They stab them and kill them. Others suspected of lagging were bayoneted and decapitated by these sadistic guards. Here's the story. At the end of every day, they would take a shovel count to see if they were missing any tools because they didn't want anybody to escape. one of the guards came up short, one shovel. And this guy liked to lose his temper a lot. So he said, "You tell me who has the shovel." And he lined all the men up in a line. Nobody said anything. He said, "I tell you what, I'll kill all of you. Somebody better come clean." A man stepped forward. The guard clubbed him to death with his rifle when he stood silently at attention. The sad part of this story is there was a recount. And come to find out, there was never a shovel missing in the first place. That man stood out and stood at attention and gave his life when he didn't have to. But he knew the guard was going to lose his temper. He was going to kill everybody. So he said, "You know what? I'll do it." You know, when you read the book of James, you're talking about instances like this. People are being murdered by the Roman government just for being Christians. I mean, if they find out that your family is a worshiper of God, they will immediately come bang on your door and take you to jail. So James is writing and he said, "Look, count it all joy when you fall into diverse trials, knowing that the trying of your faith works patience, and patience experience, and experience hope," and all these things. So he begins to describe what's happened to these Christians. Now, will somebody read verse 5? Okay. If any of you lack wisdom, what kind of wisdom is he talking about here? Is that just to be smarter? No, it goes way beyond that. In fact, what he's saying to them is, ask God for the wisdom to get through your difficult time. You know, we talked about this a little bit last week. If you haven't faced a difficult time that you think you're going to give up on God, it's coming. It's happened to me several times. It's happened to leaders in the church all the time. You know, nobody's immune to this. So just because we're not going through persecutions, the application for us today is that doesn't mean that we're not going to want to give up, just like they did in the book of James. James says that's when we need to call out to God and say, "Don't let me leave. Don't ever let me leave you." Because the time will come. The devil's going to make sure of that. So that's kind of the gist then. As we get started in this book, we're going down through chapter 1. That's really the main message. They're wanting to give up. And he says, look, don't give up just yet. All right. Let's continue on. You look there in verse 6. He said, "Let him ask in faith, nothing wavering, for he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea, driven of the wind and tossed." You know, a man that doesn't really want to stay with God, he's not going to stay with God. And that's what he's saying. You know, he's praying to God, but yet he's not saying, "Lord, I want to stay with you no matter what." Okay, he's a little bit wishy-washy. Verse 7, "Let not that man think he shall receive anything of the Lord. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways." Does anyone have something different, verse 8, for double-minded man? I'm just curious. When I looked that word up, it literally means two souls. He has two souls. So I thought that was pretty interesting. All right. I can pick up where I left off here after I mention this here. These are some outward trials that we experience that make us want to give up. In the context, persecution, sickness, financial problems, marriage problems, family problems, loss of a family member, brethren can't get along, get discouraged. There's probably some more that I could not think of, but at any rate. Okay, I am going to pick up, let's see. Here we go. Will somebody read verses 9 through 11? Verses 9 through 11. Let's talk about priorities then.
But the brother of humble circumstances is the glory in his high position, and the rich man is the glory in his humiliation, because like flowering grass he will pass away. For the sun rises with a scorching wind and withers the grass, and its flower falls off, and the beauty of its appearance is destroyed. So too the rich man in the midst of his pursuits will fade away.
Are all rich men going to hell? I don't think that's what James is saying, but I'll tell you this. If they are, all the men in this room are in trouble. We are a very rich nation. And I'll tell you, we don't even realize it most times. We don't realize how blessed we are. But it's important to be balanced. I think that sometimes if we're not careful, people begin to gain a little bit of sustenance and we begin to judge them. We say, oh, I know where his heart is, Well, that's not true. I don't know where his heart is. In fact, only God can know that, and I will tell you this, just because a man does well for himself or he is more driven than other people does not make him greedy. And just because a person is poor doesn't mean they're not covetous either. But just by reading this passage, we began to sort of wonder, well, is it wrong to be wealthy? I would say no. But it is very dangerous. It's very dangerous. In fact, you and I can just look in our society today and see the dangers of affluence. And to us, it's mediocre. It's regular. Let's just think about it. A person that makes $60,000 a year to us, that's kind of average, right? That's like the medium, regular income. A little bit below, a little bit above, you're still in the medium range. I want to tell you something right now. When I was in the Philippines, a young preacher, he worked in a business where he would haul propane. And he would take his motorcycle with his little trailer, and he had all propane tanks on there. And they would call him and say, hey, we need a refill or whatever, and he would deliver that propane. That was his job. I asked his daddy, I said, what is the average pay for someone who does that job? He said, 360 pesos a day. Sounds like a lot, doesn't it? $1 is 52 pesos. He doesn't even make $7 a day. And he has a wife and a child. $7 a day. And I think to myself, I've got to be careful. You and I both have got to be careful about how we think about and deal with our money. Now, I will tell you this. I do believe that a Christian above anyone else ought to be good with money. He shouldn't be foolish. He shouldn't be running up credit card debt. He shouldn't be $30,000 in debt knowing he's never going to pay that back. I've known people to do that. They'll get credit cards, 20% interest on them credit cards, by the way. If you don't pay them off at the end of the month, they're going to hit you hard. They swipe that card, they'll say, well, I'll just put my kids' school supplies on the credit card. Put my kids' school clothes on the credit card. I need new shoes. I put them on the credit card. Next thing you know, they got $5,000 with 20% interest. My opinion is Christians shouldn't do that. That's not smart. It's not good. And they know they'll never pay that money back. They'll pay the minimum balance every month. They'll be in debt for 30 years. And just to be honest, they'll never get anywhere. It's not good. The Bible teaches about being a good steward. Let's give some pros and cons. Jesus said, life consisteth not in the abundance of the things that a man possesses. I don't believe that Jesus taught it's wrong to be rich. I think he's giving a priority. I don't think that James taught it's wrong to be rich. I think he's giving a priority. And he said if a man puts all his trust in wealth, he's going to fade away like the flower of the grass, and he won't have a thing. My wife was telling me about one of the investors for her company, and he came up with some internet business or whatever, and they told how much he made every year, and it was up in the billions. But he died of cancer last year. I thought to myself, I wonder what a man like that thinks when he finds out he has cancer. Just think about it. Let's just say you made $3 billion a year, and then all of a sudden you find out you have cancer, and you're thinking, I'm fixing to lose like $50 billion. You know? It's already scary enough to die, and then you realize you've got to leave all that behind. Well, I think that's what James is talking about. It's a matter of priority. All right, I want to give some good and some bad here. Okay, let's give some pros and cons. Let's talk about the Bible says that it's okay for a man to have riches, and then we'll talk about that it's not good for a man to have riches. Here we go. Proverbs 13:22. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, and the wealth of the sinner is laid up for the just. You see, if we don't take the Bible in all of its context, with everything together, we would think all rich people are going to hell. You know, some people read the verse, it's harder for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. And we say, oh man, we'd be just like the people when Jesus said that. We say, well, who then can go? They asked Jesus that in that context. They said, well, who then can be saved? And it's interesting what Jesus said to them. With men, it is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. You know what Jesus did? He just put the cap on the jar and he said, I'm not telling you that all rich men will go to hell, because if we say that, I mean, the truth is most people will go to hell whether they're rich or poor. You know, Jesus said, straight is the gate and narrow is the way that leads to life, and few there be that find it. So it doesn't matter if they're rich or poor, most people will be lost. In that context, Jesus said, no, what I'm telling you is, if a man will turn to God and stop putting his trust in all the things of the world and just be a servant of God, it doesn't matter if he's rich or poor. God doesn't care, you know. As long as his priority is where it's supposed to be, it doesn't matter if he makes $100,000 a year or if he makes $300,000 a year. But there are dangers that come with riches. I'll talk about them as well. All right, I need to speed this up a little bit. On the Titanic, there was a man named Major A.H. Peuchen. I mean, you're talking way back, 1920s? This man was worth millions of dollars. I read an article one time, and I have this here, and I want to share it with you. It says, Major H.A. Peuchen aboard the Titanic left $300,000 in money and jewelry in his room when the Titanic was sinking, and he put 3 oranges in his pocket. You see, he knew. The only thing that's most important right now is whether or not I get out of this. Whether he was a Christian or not, I don't know. That's not for me to decide, but the point is, he learned quick what was a main priority. All right, let's move on. I want to ask you this question. Which of these is a biblical statement? All right, it's a test. And I'll be honest with you, when I first heard this, I think I got this wrong. I heard this maybe 10 years ago or so, but I'm pretty sure I got this wrong if I remember correctly. But let's think about it. No pain, no gain. God helps those who help themselves. Money is the root of all evil. The skin of my teeth. The early bird gets the worm. Time is free, but it's priceless. What are y'all thinking? All right. How many say 1? 2. All right. Got a couple there. 3. All right. 4. All right. Okay. All right. All right. He's changing that. All right. 5. Yeah, that's not something in the Bible, right? Number 6. All right. I was so shocked by this answer. And it is the skin of my teeth. The reason why I mention this is because money is not the root of all evil. Money is money. It's like gold. It's just gold. It's a tool that we use to survive in society. Money is not the evil thing. You know, we hear these articles about these shootings and all, and people get all upset and they say, oh, guns don't kill people, people kill people and all that, which is true. It's kind of the same idea. Money is not the evil thing. What is the evil thing? The love of money. The greed. That's why gambling is so wrong. It's not just because you're losing a certain amount of cash and wasting it. It's the motive behind it. You know, you're basically stealing. And if you're not stealing, you're losing large amounts of it. People ruin their families because of it, because of greed. So, the reason why I mention that is because the Bible does not say money is the root of all evil. It's what's in a man's heart. Now, it's hard for me to judge what's in your heart. It's hard for you to judge what's in someone else's heart. Something I decided about 2 years ago is I was going to be really careful about how I viewed other people. I believe that Jesus was like that. The difference between me and Jesus is He could see into people's hearts and I cannot. So my job as a Christian is to give people the benefit of the doubt. I don't have any business in my life looking at a man and saying, that's a covetous man. I don't. It's none of my business. I have to decide what's in my heart. You know, Job said, my bone cleaves to my skin and to my flesh, and I am escaped, notice, with the skin of my teeth. He's talking about death. I barely missed it. So, oftentimes we think money is the root of all evil is in the Bible. It's not in the Bible. The love of money is the root of all evil. All right, let's continue this. James said, go to now, ye that say, today or tomorrow we'll go into such a city, we'll continue there a year, we'll buy and sell and get gain. You know what James said? You better watch out. He's telling me that. Now, Josh, you better be careful. Because you ought to say, if the Lord will, we will do this or that. Because life is a vapor. It appears for a little time and then it vanishes away. You know what James is saying to me? Josh, where's your priority? Are you going to go there in that city and try to continue the kingdom of God? Or are you going to go there in that city and try to get rich? Let's continue. Talk about good men that were wealthy. Abraham said he was, the Bible says plainly, he was very rich in gold and silver and in cattle. Very rich. In fact, I wish I could give you the verse on that. I think it's maybe Genesis 13, somewhere around in there. I should have put that on there. But let's see here. Genesis 13:2. If you're taking notes, Abraham was very rich in cattle and silver and in gold. So, Joseph, he became king of Egypt, right? Moses was very wealthy. He was a ruler over millions of people. Job was called the greatest man of the East. He was so rich in Job chapter 1. David, of course, was a king along with many others. Josiah. Solomon was one of the richest Israeli kings they ever knew. This one's interesting. Who is Joseph of Arimathea? Yeah, he's the one who carved out the tomb for Jesus. The Bible said he was a very rich man, and he put Jesus in his own new tomb. It was freshly dug, which is very expensive, by the way. He took the body of Jesus from the Roman government and he put it in his own new tomb. The Bible says he was very, very rich. Rich people can do good things. Let's look at the other side. Evil men who were deceived by their money. Solomon comes to my mind immediately. The Bible said he left the Lord. His wives drew away his heart after him, and it was all motivated by money. Ahab was one of the most wicked rulers in Israel that ever existed. He murdered Naboth because Naboth wouldn't sell him a vineyard. Judas Iscariot was deceived by his money. The rich young ruler went away sorrowful because he had great possessions. Then there was a rich farmer. What was the farmer's motivation? Do you remember that story? What are some things that stand out to you? I'll notice this and then I'll move on. He said, I will tear down my barns, I will build greater. I have nowhere to bestow my fruits and my goods. You know, when I came back from the Philippines, I felt bad. And that's what I thought about. Here I am, able to go down to the store, buy whatever food I want. And when they go to the store, you know what they think about? I'm either going to buy toilet paper or rice. Which one? You go in public places, you use the public restroom, you better take some toilet paper with you because you're not going to find any. You want to know why? Because they're not even allowed to put it out. Because what happens is people go into that public restroom and guess what they do? They unroll every bit of it and they put it in their pocket and go home. Because nobody can afford that stuff. It's terrible. It is literally a society that is motivated with poverty everywhere. And you and I, we just don't understand that. We can't relate to something like that. So I kind of felt like this guy. You know, when I came back home, I thought, I've got to really pay close attention to where my heart is. I've got to understand there are a lot of people in the world that don't live like me. So James says, as rich people, we've got to be very, very careful. All right, I'll notice a few more and then move on. I probably prepared way too much on this, but you know, Jesus said about that rich farmer, so is he that layeth up treasure for himself. Now notice, and is not rich toward God. If the man is rich toward God first, okay, let him figure it out. He needs to be giving some money away. He needs to find out how he can help other people. Okay, but if he's rich toward God, just my opinion, it doesn't matter whether he's rich or poor. You do find passages like this. Moses forsook Egypt. He forsook the treasures that were in Egypt, all those riches, notice, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt. His priority was not with the riches. He said, I'm going to live for God first. The good news was he was still very wealthy even after that. So, I want to conclude with this idea. I'll give you 3 or 4 verses here at the conclusion of it. I have to be careful what I think about someone else. And not just about wealth. I'm talking about in every area. But specifically, the Bible condemns what I think in my heart about a rich person. My mother's father was very, very wealthy. Still is. He will tell you, if you want people to look at you differently, you start gaining some money. Everybody will. Now, at the time when he was working himself to death, he was not a Christian. Today, he's a very faithful man. He has probably given more money away than I will ever make in my life. But I will tell you this. He will know firsthand that you will lose friends quickly because of the way people see you if you have money. Now me, I've never been rich. I probably never will be rich. I probably will never see a dime of any of that money, and I'm not concerned with that at all. I'm thankful for my grandfather's example. If it were not for him, I would not be a Christian today. I can tell you that for sure. And especially my grandmother, his wife, because she put up with him all the days when he was drinking and doing all the stuff he wasn't supposed to be doing. Where is my priority today? That's what James is saying. Curse not the king, no, not in thy thought, and curse not the rich in the bedchamber. For the bird of the air shall carry the voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter. And that goes for every area. I need to be careful. I'm telling you, I told myself this. I need to be careful how I view people, especially in the congregation. I need to be as patient with people as the Lord has been patient with me. I need to love them like the Lord has been loving to me. And maybe there is a man who has his priorities wrong, but you know what? I did too. I was just like that guy. And I still don't have everything figured out. So why am I going to point my finger at someone else and say, look what he's doing, when I've got 3 fingers pointing right back at myself? So I guess the idea for us today is just to be careful. All right, let's move on. Will somebody read James chapter 1 and verse 12? James chapter 1 and verse 12. Okay. Blessed is the man that endureth temptation. Now, this temptation is different than earlier in the chapter. You know, in verses 1 through 3, he said, count it all joy when you fall into divers trials. The King James uses the word temptations. Now, those are outward trials. That's like persecution, you know, things that make you want to give up on your faith. Now, this is different. This in verse 12 is literally the temptation to commit sin. How do I know that? I'll give you a hint. Somebody read verse 13 and 14. Miss April, will you read that?
No one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone.
Okay. Evil. The temptation to do evil. God does not tempt people to do evil. So James says, blessed is the man that endures the temptation to sin. He gets through that hard time. And I would say that just like Paul said, you know, let a man think he stands lest he fall. You know, that type of thing. A man needs to think to himself, I need to take heed to this and try to stand, because if I don't, I'm going to fall to the temptation. Perfect illustration of this is what you see on the screen. Adam and Eve fell to the temptation. As a result, we have a consequence on humanity today that all people will die, just like God told them would happen. I want to focus on the word blessed for a minute. Somebody said there are 7 billion people in the world and there's only 10 that I can tolerate. Another one said, if I could only be as thin as my patience. You know, something I can't stand, and I'll tell you this, I have probably been guilty of this, and I don't want to. I cannot stand being around judgmental people. Kills me. And I think to myself, the only person that could be around you is you. Most times it's negativity all the time. You know, the temptation to judge others, it brings a lot of pain on many people. So, I need to be careful about how I'm looking at other people. Because I may be tempted to gossip about them. I may be tempted to run them in the dirt. And I will tell you this, a lot of times when you hear gossip, it's not even true. It's motivated and fueled by hatred, and people don't even know whether or not it's true. But they keep spreading it. The temptation is tough sometimes. All right, I've got several things I want to mention here. Let's focus on the word blessed for a minute. He said, blessed is the man. This word literally has the idea of a deep joy. It's like what Jesus said when He said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you that mourn. Blessed are they who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. You know, that word blessed literally means it is out of connection with all hurt and pain and sorrow. You still have joy. You could find out you have cancer tomorrow, but you know what? You can still be blessed. Maybe somebody in your family just passed away, but you can still have joy. That's this idea. A man who endures, who fights the devil. He said that's a blessed man. All right, we'll notice some other times in the book of James that word is mentioned, and we'll continue this next Sunday. Thank you.